Welcome to the digital event Clouds of War, underwritten by Cisco. Today we'll discuss the implications of the Defense Department's cloud adoption from the tactical edge to the battlefield. We'll examine how advances in cloud computing technology are affecting the Department of Defense and the processes. And on the security front, what the military can do to ensure that sensitive data is protected and the mission remains uninterrupted. So throughout the program today, we'll be taking questions from the audience, which is you. In these events, we typically find that there are a few too many questions to deal with by the time we reach the end of the program at 3:45, with an extra 10 to 15 minutes of a bonus conversation after that. So please get your questions in as soon as they arise. I really want to make sure that all the questions that come from you, everybody has an opportunity to answer. There's probably really too many. So if you have one, make sure to submit it. And with that, I'd like to welcome to our all-star stage this awesome lineup. We have Doug Cosa, Deputy Chief Information Officer from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and George DeChalk, Chief Information Officer at the Defense Logistics Agency. So thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks. Let's go with you, George. Tell us a little bit about what you do at the Logistics Agency and how the cloud is changing that.
Well, I think first you got to realize that Defense Logistics Agency operates on a little bit different business model than the rest of the government. We're a working capital fund organization, which means largely non-appropriated dollars. We don't get funding every year, an annual budget from Congress. We have to sell stuff, put a little bit of what we call profit on it, and that covers our operating costs. So we operate very much like a nonprofit company. So those incentives drive us to try to be very efficient, and movement to the cloud for all the right reasons is a quest for that efficiency to better serve our customers. In broad brushstrokes, DLA has about 27,000 employees. We maintain a global network with approximately 100,000 endpoints. We have about 200 applications right now that 85% of which are in the cloud. And we have about 19 critical systems which are in the process of migrating toward the cloud, and conduct about 7 billion transactions a year over our network. So that's just a thumbnail of what we do.
So 80% of what you're doing right now is in the cloud. And can you, real quick before we get to Doug, give me a sense of how that compares to, say, 3 years ago in terms of how you were utilizing cloud at DLA?
Well, we just started this migration about 3-4 years ago as well. We started going to Cloud One initially, which was the Mill Cloud, not Cloud One. Don't want to confuse them. Which was the DISA offering at 1.0, and then started to migrate from there to commercial services. So now we have products that are in Azure, AWS, IBM Cloud, Salesforce, and I think maybe even a Google Cloud product as well. So we're definitely a multi-cloud strategy.
And we want to come back to that in a little bit because we hear a lot of different things about different new cloud programs that the Defense Department is experimenting with. There's some very big headliner ones, but at the end of the day, there is the big cloud contracts that you hear about, in addition to a lot of other cloud projects that will be glommed onto it, an enormous architecture, but it's very much still a multi-cloud type of situation. It's just that now you have enterprise-level multi-clouds on top of other clouds, all working with small tactical networks, sometimes at the very edge. So Doug, give me a sense at DIA of where you are right now in cloud adoption and where that was a few years ago, contrasted to today.
Sure. Well, we're certainly not doing it alone. It's really an interagency effort across the intelligence community. We have quite a large network. We support about 250,000 users across the world, about 300 locations all over the world. Some have a robust network infrastructure. Some are completely isolated, where we have to support disconnected operations. So we have quite a complex environment that we run into on a regular basis. In terms of our cloud services, we started this journey, gosh, it's been maybe 7 or 8 years ago now. with other IC agencies. And the initial idea is that we would have a single cloud that would host all the applications and data. That kind of idea migrated to, okay, we'll have one cloud for data, one cloud for applications. And now as a community, we've certainly recognized the need for a multi-cloud environment, really matching the capabilities with the functions we need to perform. We're really in a hybrid approach. There are a lot of data centers that I still run all across the country, all across the world. And that's really where we have very specific operational requirements and mission needs, a lot of sensitive functions that we perform across the agencies that leverage the cloud, and specific data caching requirements that they need. Off-premise, of course, we use cloud services, and now we are into a multi-vendor, multi-offering approach. That's where we can take, of course, advantage of the elastic computing capabilities. I would say a lot of what we've done, we've certainly migrated a lot of mission applications to that, and data and all the associated infrastructure. But the business applications is where we've really been focusing over the past year. These are things like our HR systems, our financial systems, the things that we need to do and have access to all over the world. But I think this whole COVID environment has now actually really presented new opportunities and shed new light on functions that we never thought we could do before. Just 3 months ago, we were under the impression that everything needed to be done in the office. That's certainly not the case anymore. In fact, over the past 90 days, we've been operating really with 20% of our workforce, and the majority of those business functions have moved at home. And we made some pretty quick migrations of a number of our services to commercial clouds. It's been a success thus far, but also a learning experience as we go through it.
Yeah. So if no one has ever been to the DIA headquarters, it's among, in terms of military installations, I think that it's probably the most gorgeous that I've ever seen. So it's sort of a shame for folks who don't get to go into that office every day. But you bring up an important point. How do you make sure that as you transition to a more and more remote workforce, especially analysts that are dealing with highly sensitive subject matter, there's a lot of concern right now about the security of remote work. And even with regular Fortune 500 companies that aren't dealing with highly sensitive information, that's a concern. Can you talk to us a little bit about how migrating to the cloud in the way that you're doing it actually creates additional security, even when you're working remote?
Yeah, that's a good point. Before we had data, applications, everything all over the place in different systems. One of the benefits of cloud services has been we've been able to centralize at least our view of that, not just within a single cloud, but across clouds. That's made it really helpful in terms of the security from understanding what are all the endpoints, what are people leveraging, who's leveraging it. As a community, we've really been working towards multi-factor authentication, identity-based access, those types of things we've really taken advantage of. I would say, still the biggest emphasis area for us is on the endpoints and securing those. We are moving to a zero trust environment in that. And as the old adage goes, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So really focusing on the endpoints has been a priority for us as we made that migration.
And I want to get back to Doug in a second. But first, how are you defining zero trust? I've heard it defined in a couple of different ways, basically by a few different people that were selling different things. I've heard people define it as basically no matter what device or platform a user is using, that you can authenticate that user. And so it's kind of device or platform agnostic, but you're monitoring all of the activity from a particular individual. I've heard it described exactly as you have right now, total endpoint security. Define for DIA what zero trust is.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's really make no assumptions, right? We have to validate every user that's on the network. Before, in the old days, we didn't have a good handle, particularly on the endpoints of who was there, who was trying to access, who was authenticating in. The cloud services that we've leveraged have really helped us in that area. But for us, again, to simply put, it's make no assumptions about who's on the network. We have to validate everyone.
Okay. George, one of the things that we had talked about a little bit earlier is some of the things that moving to the cloud allows you to do in terms of moving to a different way of developing different pieces of platform, different pieces of software. So develop DevSecOps and an entirely new model for creating software and products that is enabled by the cloud. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're working with that?
No, you've got it exactly right. A primary motivation for moving to the cloud is it's a foundational infrastructure. And it gives us, I call it the 4 A's. It gives us agility, AI, analytics, and probably most importantly, automation. And what we're starting to see now is a flip of the paradigm of what a CIO does. You could say a few years ago, a CIO was focused on infrastructure and very focused on, and the software that we bought in an organization was largely you contract with an organization, they built a special purpose software that then they maintained for the next 30 years. Okay, it was a great model for a vendor. Well, that paradigm now is flipped where we're outsourcing the infrastructure, basically, it's the cloud, the platform, the software as a service. So that's being outsourced. And now CIOs are starting to build their own software, largely from, suites of products already out there like SaaS and products similar, and with just a modest amount of customization. And we're doing that with in-house talent or buying labor by the hour to do that. So we've taken that CIO paradigm and flipped it. And I think the cloud is largely responsible for enabling that.
And how does that change the software development cycle for you guys, and also the sustainment cycle? Because I know covering defense budgets for a long time, and I see where money goes, especially out of IT. And exactly as you say, there are great big contractors who make a lot of money sort of providing software services, products that they invented a long time ago that people still use if they feel like they still have to use. So by moving it to a point where CIOs can then undertake more of that development themselves, how does that change the cycle of actually making stuff?
Well, that's the part I talked about agility. We have Sherpas or solution engineers that go out, meet with our customers or users, find out what their problems are, proffer a solution. Then there's the DevSecOps pipeline. Do small little chunks of hey, is this what you are looking for? Does this scratch your itch or not? So the dev environment now looks exactly like your production or your operational environment. So as soon as you deploy something, it's not going to change. In the past, you would develop in one environment and deploy in another one, and you'd have all kinds of problems that you'd have to play whack-a-mole with for a couple of days before you got things working. And part of the DevSecOps now is to introduce automation in that pipeline and get that process ATO. So I could find a product that a customer or user wants. We spin it out. It goes through automated testing, gets automatically deployed, and we could shrink that development cycle from what used to be maybe 2 releases a year to doing 2 releases a day if they wanted, if they have such a need to change. And so in an environment like today, where everything is uncertain, that sort of agility really does propel an organization.
Yeah, Doug, tell us a little bit about how cloud has created a new environment for software development over there. And also, can you give us a sense of what your software needs are? I've been to DI, I talked to analysts, and I know that they stood up a shop to help analysts and programmers kind of work together in little teams to develop tools based on what the analysts need. Give us a sense of what the software development needs are there and how the cloud affects that.
Yeah, it's definitely changed over the past couple of years for us. As an organization, CIO used to own everything, right? From the applications to the infrastructure and everything in between. We've changed that model to where our customers, the other directorates within the agency, the other services that we support across the community, they have a lot of those software development skills now. We're not unique in that. Those skills are prevalent across the whole community. What we are unique in is providing the infrastructure, but then also setting the standards, right? The policies for how you do develop software, how you process data, how it's managed, work around unique. We've really shifted that model. DevSecOps, that environment we use primarily on the high side in our classified environment. We started out on our own as an agency. over the years, particularly last year, we've really come together as a community for doing that to where we have reciprocity. And I've seen a lot of progress in that area. I would say that's been among the biggest benefits of the CIOs coming together in our DevSecOps environment. Automation has been key. Just like George was saying, things that would have taken us months, years, we're now doing in a matter of days by having security tightly coupled in. For the agency over time, and I'd say this is true for the federal government as a whole, we started kind of with a waterfall model. We did security at the end, only to have to go back and fix things. Having that, right at the beginning has really streamlined our operations that we have for software development.
Yeah, that's that change from the waterfall model of development, where security becomes an afterthought, to something that is where security is at the beginning part of the design process. That's been a kind of cultural change that I've seen over all of the best practices in IT in the last 2 years. And you can sort of get a sense of it. If any of you, in this sort of side note, are interested in security and kind of the culture that goes with cybersecurity, you might go check out, there's a conference every year called DEF CON that takes place in Las Vegas. And the type of folks that are cybersecurity practitioners, they're just very different from the type of folks that are working in the sort of startup land, building something really quick with Series A funding, and they push it out the door. Cybersecurity folks tend to be a little bit older, tend to be a little bit more punk, tend to be a little bit angrier, because all their concerns kind of only factor in later. And so they spend their life warning people, you're designing this poorly, and then everyone disregards them until it's too late, and then they have to go in and fix everybody's mess. And so you're beginning to see now, as you've heard, and really across all the shops that are doing it correctly, you're beginning to see that change, where the angry old guys that only bring you the problems, they're part of the design process now more in the beginning. It's a very good change. And if you are involved in developing software, I would say go find the angriest software developer you can find and bring him in early and make sure he's taken care of, because you want that voice in that room, as you just heard. So you both talked a little bit about automation, and in covering how the Defense Department talks about the cloud, one thing that they've really made a big point of is at a very high level how it enables next generation artificial intelligence, but even on a much lower level, how that unity of data and unity of standards creates opportunities to apply machine learning tools that are even very simple, that are even very basic. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how, what you mean when you talk about automation that is being supported by the cloud, and what happens when you have a data depository where you have everything is structured in a way that is unified, how important that is, and also important is to have a unity of standardization when you try to make something. I'll start with you, George.
Yeah, no, great question. The feedstock for artificial intelligence is data. So unless you get your data architecture and you get your data right, you're going to fail at any AI effort. And the real value that AI has is, you see a lot of products that take a lot of common databases, they're publicly available, and they have some unique attribute in their algorithm, and they could give you some sort of predictive analytics. Our real value is the government or DoD, or in our case, DLA unique data that we mash up with that publicly available data to give us those insights. And so having well-tagged, a strong data governance model, and that cloud that enables a large data warehouse, so you could dip your toes in it, in that data lake, is critical to advancing AI for a lot of very broad applications. Now, it's not just AI, but it's also maybe the retrospective look, or the forensics or data analytics in a big way too. What they used to call big data is also still hasn't lost its importance.
Right. Yes, Doug.
So we've seen a lot of benefit in terms of machine learning and AI and automation. Particularly on tasks that would normally have been repetitive for analysts, like image recognition, even in biometrics for some of the more advanced things we do in terms of matching people based on facial features, just as one example. that's certainly been a huge value to us. The flip side to that is, in the end, we are an intelligence organization. Analysis and collection is the heart of what we do. And analysis really is what we provide the policymakers. And in that, we have to obviously eliminate bias in that. And part of the issues with automation is it can automate the status quo, meaning it can inject bias. The big thing we have to be aware of is that computers don't think with analogy like we do. They think in terms of pixels and data. But the critical thinking is where we need to be careful. And I think as an intelligence organization, that's where we have to be extremely careful in the data standards and the integrity of the data and understanding what we're looking at and providing meaning. In the old days, you had to really think critically before you ran an algorithm. Today, that comes in seconds. And we have to remember that. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things to do. In the end, that efficiency is great. It speeds up intelligence operations, again, the heart of what we do. But automation, in a sense, does degrade our peripheral vision, right? Where it kind of narrows the problem into one that we can now understand. We collect way more data than we can process, which is it's a great thing. And automation has helped scope that for us to really focus what we're looking at. But it can also lead us down the wrong direction quickly. And so having the data standards, having that data policy has been extremely important for us as a community.
If any of you are actually out there in the audience concerned or are interested in how the Defense Department goes about trying to mitigate the possible effects of data bias and things like that, I recommend looking at the DoD ethics principles that are now being adopted across the Defense Department at the JAIC. And I can say with, I think, 80% probability, but you'll know more tomorrow because they're announcing this tomorrow across the entire intelligence community. That's going to be modeled after the Defense Department's ethical guidelines. And the key thing is, don't just read the first page of those. There's 80 pages. And you want to go into the back, the annexes, where they talk about actual implementation, and that's where you hear what you just heard. That's where you hear how you actually go about the process of bringing somebody in and understanding and structuring and tagging and organizing data from the beginning so that it feeds into a process that has credibility and that is audible. And auditability in artificial intelligence, we'll be hearing a lot about it, especially as some algorithms begin to break down and produce results that cause problems. Because I think folks that are very happy to implement new buzzwordy tech and do so without paying attention to how that actually works, the data that goes into it and how you clean it, structure it, format it. You'll be reading about problems in those organizations, I think, fairly soon. But I want to go back. Oh, please go ahead, George.
Just one more comment about automation that we've discovered is that it's got to go hand in hand with process redesign and process engineering, in that you automate a bad process, you've done exactly that. You've automated a bad process. So we've produced over the last year about 100 bots, and probably 80% of those are unattended bots, saving about 200,000 man hours already. And we did find out the hard way, I think, in some cases, that we have to have part and parcel to automation is process re-engineering as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating. This idea of creating a bot or a particular algorithm, and it suits what you designed it for, but perhaps because you didn't know beforehand what the effects of your design would be, you created a concatenation effect, and a little bit like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. If any of you have ever seen that old Disney cartoon from Fantasia, where Mickey basically designs a bot to move water from one place to another, but he doesn't understand the scaling function of the bot he made. So pretty soon you've got basically a warlock's house full of water. Even though the bot was designed completely correctly and performed its utility function accurately, the scaling function was off. So I think this is an important point. How are you beginning to understand at an earlier stage the effects of what you're creating? And to take it back to the cloud, does the cloud, perhaps through sandboxes or the creation of virtual networks, does that provide an opportunity for experimentation in this stuff that you wouldn't normally have? either, any of you. Doug, you seem to.
Yeah, it certainly does, and experimentation is important for us. One of the things that has been a challenge are, as I mentioned in the beginning, some of those locations that are overseas that don't have that connectivity. That's where among our most important work is done, and getting them connected into our environment, whether it's an analytic environment, a data environment, that's proven to be a challenge. We've started with most of our cloud services within the National Capital Region, and then expanded that beyond the U.S. Right now, we're really relying on our own infrastructure to connect us overseas. And so a lot of what we've done is our own virtual clouds that we provide to our customers. It's been valuable, but it does make it more complex, as George was saying, in terms of the underlying data processes and bringing everything together. That's certainly been one of our biggest challenges.
George.
One of the things that we is on our roadmap, and we're just now kicking it off, is that as we move to the cloud, you mentioned virtual machines or virtual networks. The VM concept worked well, but you had to have like a one-for-one match, application for VM. With the advent of containers now, containers allow portability across clouds. So as we move stuff to the cloud, we're starting to embrace containers in order to not lock ourselves in to a particular cloud model and have that container be applicable across different cloud models should we decide to recompete cloud service provider every 3 to 5 years or so.
That's great. And I think that's also really key for government, because written into all of these contracts, if you all out there watch the cloud contracts that show up on GovBizOps, et cetera, they do have recompete clauses, like they have to. Congress really wants the option to recompete this stuff. So creating different tools that can then be moved to perhaps different clouds or architectures, that's not just good practice for the Defense Department. That's something that's probably going to serve, I think, anybody that's endeavoring with this stuff. I want to turn back, Doug, to something that you talked about, because this is a huge problem for the Defense Department, a big challenge going forward, and that is providing services in these extreme environments. We know that in the capital region, there's lots of bandwidth, there's lots of connectivity. Fortune 500 companies never have to worry about that sort of thing. If you're talking to folks that are working out of AFRICOM or some other very difficult AOR, they are in many ways in the most need of both up-to-date, high-resolution intelligence, and perhaps even to create their own software tools to do analysis. So can you talk me through the future of providing them with the sort of cloud capabilities that we today enjoy in places where connectivity is not an issue?
Yeah, certainly. As George said, right now we rely on containers. I mean, as that model. Where we are in terms of going into the future, one, it requires a solid foundation that we build upon that connect them to our cloud services. That involves upgrading our infrastructure in terms of bandwidth and redundancy. So given the critical operations that we have at the sites we support, particularly the command and commands, we need to make sure that, one, the existing lines we have the bandwidth to accommodate what they're trying to do, but then they also have the redundancy and the failover capabilities should we see unforeseen circumstances. We've been building that in over time. The great news about partnering with the broader IC and DoD on this, particularly what we've done in C2S, which is overseen by CIA, and then GovCloud with NSA, having been a partner in those services, we've been able to work with them to extend cloud services to our customers all over the world. Now that's growing. It's certainly not as mature as we need it to be today, but we are absolutely partnering with them and other IC elements and DoD elements that are part of the ISIT effort.
Mm-hmm. So I want to remind everybody that we don't have too much longer left, really just 15 minutes for you to get in your questions before we turn it over to our bonus conversation. So if you have them, we really want to hear them, please go ahead and submit them in that chat function that you're going to see on your screen. But let me turn it over back to you, George, and talk us a little bit through how you see the future of extending services to places where right now it's very difficult to do? Is it a matter of just building out bandwidth and satellite connections and through all these other things? Or can you scale down through code, through containerization, through other things, so that you can create something like a big experience, even in a harsh environment where you have small connectivity?
Yeah, our bandwidth requirements pale in comparison to what the IC uses. Our customers order things, and I won't say it's always low bandwidth, but it's not exceptionally for any one user. It's not exceptionally large. So our requirements are much more modest, and it's easier to get to the edge. So don't know what else to say about that.
No, understood. So we do have a question in with respect to a data lake and mitigating bias. What do you estimate is the degree to which data should be structured versus unstructured? Structuring data takes a lot of time, especially if you have to take humans to do it, and especially if you have to give the humans clearance. Yes, structured versus unstructured. What do you estimate is the degree to which the data should be one or the other?
Well, we've had a lot of lessons learned in this within DIA and then the intelligence community as well. I've seen a lot of effort spent on attempting to create data catalogs for everything that we have, which has been an immense effort in terms of time and resources. At a high level, it's useful because we know where to get data. So a high level data catalog has been useful. In terms of trying to structure all the data that we have, that'll never happen. There's just too much of it, and it changes too frequently to be able to efficiently maintain it. Where I've seen it work well is when we have storm warning. Is that what that is?
Storm warning, yes. For everyone at home. If you're in DC, there's a storm warning, and if you're elsewhere, don't worry about it. But just wanted to let you all know.
Where I've seen data structuring and management work very well is when we do it in the context of specific problems that we're trying to solve as a community. We've seen that with foundational military intelligence, where we have that highly structured, and that has really helped us in terms of the automation. Our Mars program is an example of that. I've seen that. I mentioned biometrics before in my participation in standing up the National Vetting Center, which we did as a whole of government a couple of years ago, where we really had a robust data strategy that underpinned the operations of what we were trying to do. That was helpful. We had a vision of where we needed to be. But trying to do it more broadly, generically across the entire community just hasn't yielded the benefits versus the resources that we would need to put into that.
Yeah. So this is great. And listening to this, and it sounds like there's already a ton of innovation that's happening in your all shop, but you both reach out to the private sector a lot and reach out to tech startups and established tech companies too. And George, I know you have very deep experience here talking to a lot of folks in the private tech world about what they're offering right now. When you look at the trends that are coming out of industry and are going to be relevant to the Defense Department in terms of not only cloud offerings, because those big cloud companies, we hear about them all the time, but also tools and different ways to make use out of them. What are some of the trends or products or companies that you've seen lately that show you what looks like a way forward that you've seen that has sort of caught your imagination and says this is the way this is going in the future?
Yeah, I think anything to drive down costs, and we're talking a lot about RPA and automation. We use UiPath, which is I think a really good product for us because it's a combination of low code and AI that we use to create our bots. I think something that we talked a lot about a while ago that we quit talking about, and I think it's going to come back, is VR or AR. And I think you're going to see that because of teleworking. We were forced into this situation. Satya Nadella said in the past 2 months, we've done 2 years of digital transformation. So I think things like VR and AR are really going to start catching on just because of the way our workforce is going to be restructured in the not too distant future.
And this workforce restructuring, you're talking about more people remote. You're talking about better use of a kind of globalized talent pool, and you're talking about, I guess, what else? When you think of what this restructuring is.
Well, I think of like what we're doing today. Our workforce is largely distributed right now because of some of the restrictions on density of population in the workplace right now. So you have to work from home. But that experience, while is somewhat enriching, we got Zoom, we got WebEx, we got all these events that try to help us keep connected. It's really not as interactive and as immersive as it is when you're face to face.
Right.
So that's why I think the AR, the VR is going to come into play as we move to 5G and we have higher bandwidth available. We get more immersive in our environments. Working remotely is going to get closer and closer to how it was when you're working together, but separately now.
Yeah, I haven't even thought of 5G and its impact on everything that we're discussing here today. The Defense Department has 5 different very big 5G sort of test pilots going on. One of them is in AR, which is augmented reality for folks out there. One in Internet of Things, and a big, potentially groundbreaking one, spectrum sharing. And it sounds very dull, but spectrum sharing is going to create if we can figure out how to do it, it's going to create a market for the future that is enormous. So, Doug, when you look at the impacts of 5G on what you're doing, with the understanding that you're not going to be able to have 5G connectivity every place, what does that change?
I'm right with George. I never imagined we would be in this environment that we're working in right now. Before, I've had 100% of our staff in the office, working in the office on a separate system. Now we've completely flipped that model. We were, like I say, 80, 90% at one point. We're still a very high percentage, and we definitely plan to continue that. I think 5G is going to really help us with that business model of what do our operations now look like on the unclassified side in terms of benefiting all of those new functions that we're now doing on a different platform that we never imagined that we would do before. That's where my mind is right now, looking at opportunities for how we sustain what we've already set up.
Is there, and this speaks to sort of data in general, and I think that it's tangentially related to the cloud. As you begin to work so hands-on with data, figuring out how to structure it and how to put it in the right place so that it actually is useful in a cloud environment, you can build these automation tools on it and build bots that can deal with it. Overclassification of data, is something that from the top of the Defense Department on down, everyone complains about a lot. It's something that the IC and the Defense Department do reflexively. We're trying to change that. Is there an opportunity to fix that data classification problem? And is that essential to truly realize the benefits of this new scalable cloud technology that you're all describing?
Yeah, we've actually started. So our chief data officer within DIA, who's a part of CIO, we've stood up a data governance platform. So, as an IC and a DoD element, we're subject to a number of policies and laws that govern our operations. What we've done is automate a lot of that to where people were guessing before, and as a result, as you say, overclassified things potentially. We now have our data to where a piece of data is guided and attached to the policies and laws that govern that. So people don't have to guess anymore. That it's associated as an element of the data as we use it. That's been a tremendous help. We've had a lot of that in more of an experimental prototype form over the past couple of years. We're now transitioning that into operations. And we're starting really with the business operations that we're doing. Again, it's more like the financial, the HR functions, starting there and then building the concept out to really drive a lot of what we do.
George, does classification of data, does that have any effect at all on what you're doing or your ability to reach out to other contractors and service providers?
No, we largely operate at the unclassified level with some exceptions, certainly when it comes to operations. But what does scare me is the amount of data available, and often a bunch of unclassified data that is aggregated can become classified and given adversary insight. So.
Yeah, this is a good point. This whole question of when do you create open source intelligence that actually can provide adversarial advantage if it's correlated with the right data or mixing with the right stuff. We're only at the beginning of understanding a new field called AI safety that deals with some of these issues, with how you can apply different algorithms to huge swaths of open source intelligence and essentially weaponize that. It's something that different scholars from around the world, including folks in China and Russia, have already shown great capacity with, and us as well. So this is a big issue, is how you deal with the fact that a lot of stuff out there that exists in the open source that I, as a journalist, use all the time. I'm really happy to have it. I'm always in favor of more things being open source. But you can create new insights and intelligence through AI that would be invisible to regular humans. And so then you have a potential problem. And so the best thing to do is figure out how to anticipate that early. And of course, that's not easy to do. I mean, that is a multi-billion-dollar question, and a big problem for everybody at the Defense Department. So with that, we don't have a lot of time left. We're going to switch over to our bonus conversation very shortly. I wanted to see either of you last thoughts, big recommendations for folks out there, program managers, or just folks that are standing up their own beginning of a cloud program in their organization. The most important thing to do and the most important thing not to do. I'll start with you, George.
I'd say get the contracts right. You know, there's a gap in the DoD knowledge base in terms of dealing with cloud service providers as well as software as a service providers, and trying to structure those contracts correctly without the shuckses when you find out something that's bad that you hadn't anticipated. So, and that's a learning journey. So,
yeah, absolutely, Doug.
Yeah, two things. First, I would say in terms of what we begin adopting, you know, we tried to take a lot on at once as an agency, as a community in the early days. Boil the ocean, as many people used to say. What we found is focusing on the smaller, more manageable functions and capabilities, developing less complicated solutions that work collectively has paid off, right? It's an evolution over time. We've certainly learned that as our transition to cloud services. Again, George makes another great point. A program executive office has really paid off for us to manage the contracts and all of the efforts and really kind of have a single entity that oversees it all. That's been another big lesson learned for us in terms of the efficiency of how we manage, especially as we go into a multi-cloud environment.
Okay, and I'll add one more just from our discussion that we had today is bring in the security professional in the design, in the architecture phase very early on. If you're working with AI, bring in somebody that understands ethics, privacy law, etc. Bringing them in earlier rather than later, as we were just talking about, really key, because you want them to have a voice in the design process in the building, not as the voice of someone who's going to fix an expensive mistake. Never want that. So that's with that, right. Doug and George, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed talking with you. I'm going to turn it over to Danielle Thayer, publisher of Defense One, for our next session. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Patrick. I'm pleased to continue this conversation in a session presented by our underwriter, Cisco. And joining me today is Sean Robertson. He's the Senior Director of Defense Operations at Cisco. Hi, Sean. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Daniela. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And before we dive in, I thought, Sean, I would just ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Share with the audience a little bit about your career and how you arrived at your current role at Cisco and what you do in that current role.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been in the high-tech industry for about 25 years now. I've covered primarily the federal space with some in the commercial segment as well. For the past 10 years, I've been at Cisco. I'm currently responsible for our DoD business. So I have the ability to influence how we innovate and align to our defense DoD requirements. So the past 10 years have been at Cisco. The last 4 have been in DoD. Prior to that, I ran our federal architectures team, and that's where I was responsible for the launch of our first FedRAMP cloud compliant solution, or FedRAMP compliant cloud solution for collaboration. Prior to joining Cisco, I spent most of my time in the application space, And that's going to be a good advantage point to watch the evolution of cloud adoption as well as cloud consumption strategies. And it's a pleasure to be here to speak with you.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I think that sets us up really nicely for our conversation. I want to start out talking a little bit about the Government Business Council's recent poll. For those of you in our audience that don't know, GBC for short is our research division at Government Executive Media Group, and Defense One is one of the brands also under Government Executive Media Group. And they conducted a recent poll that Cisco had supported, just full transparency, about cloud, government cloud adoption specifically. And one key finding was that cloud security remains the number one priority for most that were answered this poll. So, Sean, I wanted to ask you to address that. What are the biggest challenges that you see at the Defense Department around cloud security specifically? And what recommendations would you have for overcoming these?
Absolutely. So, it's no surprise that security and privacy challenges were top of mind when asked about adopting cloud-based solutions. It's critical that the cloud security be equal to or greater than what they've traditionally had for on-premise environments. With the cloud adoption, they're seeing a tremendous amount of influx of data. They're seeing a lot of different SaaS offerings, whether it's Office 365, Teams, or WebEx, which is what we're actually on today. There's a surge in cloud offerings. There's more data points. There's more remote users, and all of these things are really pushing the limits of the traditional networks. Right. So the traditional networks are struggling to keep up with the shift of internet traffic that's moving more from the edge to the cloud than traditionally what it was in traditional environments. And so as they continue the networks are struggling to keep up with having consistent security controls and processes with this shift of traffic moving more from the edge to the cloud. So one of the recommendations is, really a zero trust approach. And so that's getting rid of the old castle and moat approach where you kind of build your perimeter and everything inside is secure. And it's more aligning your security around the data and the user and how it interacts with services and data rather than really looking at it from a perimeter perspective. And we're already seeing this being adopted across the DoD. And as they move forward, cybersecurity must be top of mind as they develop products, as they look at operations, and as they look at ways to secure their data. It needs to be done from the beginning and not bolted on at the end. And so a well-architected multi-cloud environment will allow more remote users to connect securely than prior in the traditional on-prem environments. And as we're seeing with COVID, there's absolutely going to be a need for more remote users to connect securely. And that's not going to change in the post-COVID environment either.
That makes a lot of sense. In the previous panel, they did discuss a little bit the implementation progress across DoD. So beyond security, what do you see as the biggest impediments to cloud adoption?
So, absolutely. So cloud adoption has certainly accelerated in the public sector the last 10 years. It's a critical component of a lot of key government initiatives. AI, machine learning, huge in DoD, IoT, and then enterprise modernization, of course, it's big there as well, and that's an ongoing process. And these cloud platforms are enabling the government to really store, share, and process data with greater agility and more processing power than ever seen before. So there's huge benefits to leveraging the cloud. And when implemented correctly, cloud services can help DoD, save money, and really improve the end user experience, which we've seen as a key driver for a lot of government agencies. The Air Force just this past year named a chief experience officer, which is a huge step. And so, if they really adopt cloud the right way, it can have an impact on all those things as well, and most importantly, ensuring mission success. However, there are challenges that come with it, and a lot of that comes down to attention to detail, and really the realization that cloud is not a silver bullet to government data and applications. And so the first big impediment is really visibility, end-to-end enterprise visibility. So visibility will help them reduce complexity. It'll help them to pinpoint potential issues in applications, networks, et cetera, that could be impacting the end user experience. So better visibility will allow for better application performance, which will ultimately deliver a better end user experience. And applications are really the key to delivering successful on the mission as well. And so, focusing on the relationship between the user and device, and then the services, regardless of whether they're on-prem or in the cloud, is really the key to providing a cloud-ready network. And that's the second impediment, is that as it stands right now, there's a lack of cloud-ready networks in the DoD. And so the biggest thing to overcome these impediments is, one, focusing on the architect and the underlying network to ensure that you have optimal end user experience, as well as making sure that security is embedded throughout the network and not really just something that's looked at as a bolt-on at the end. And the one thing that I'll point out is the cloud didn't face the need for modern networks. The cloud's only making it more important to modernize your networks to keep up with the challenges that we just talked about.
So just now, in talking about the impediments, you actually touched on this, but I really want to talk about why cloud has become such a cornerstone of agencies' IT modernization strategies, including, in particular, the Department of Defense. So what are some of the possibilities of cloud adoption at scale? Can you share some specific examples of impacts that it could have on process and mission outcomes?
Absolutely. So the first thing that I noticed when I started calling on the DoD and doing research is that they don't have a data problem, right? You'll hear the leadership of the DoD talk about it. They have vast amounts of data. What they struggle with is the ability to leverage the data, and cloud is the big basis for which they're going to be able to begin to leverage the data. And that's key to making decisions, and decision making is key to the DoD's success in the mission. It also, moving to the cloud also allows them to focus on the applications, the end user experience, more mission things that are core to their mission. And it gets them out of managing data centers and doing things that industry has done very well, and allows industry to manage the data centers, which become the cloud, allows them to focus on the applications and things that support their actual mission. And one example where I think cloud can be a huge benefit, if you look at depots, there's numerous depots around the world, and they're important for the readiness of the military. And as it stands right now, each depot acts as its own little data center. They run their own applications to support their depot, right? Wouldn't it make sense to look at those depots holistically, to have one set of applications that all of the depots use, served from a cloud? You can then look at the data holistically and have a better picture of the readiness because all the data resides in one area. And it can improve efficiencies, not only in readiness, but also in saving money because you're not managing the data centers. And you have the whole data set, so you can run analytics on it as well. So that's just one example where they can really leverage the cloud to really improve efficiencies.
So that's like efficiencies and standardization. So let me ask you about the introduction of Cloud Smart. There's been a renewed emphasis on the multi-cloud implementation. Multi-cloud, as I understand it, can be complicated, but certainly has many benefits and is often a recommended approach. What are the biggest benefits of a multi-cloud approach from your perspective?
So the biggest, it really comes down to choice and access, right? And so the reason why it's important to have a multi-cloud environment is, there's going to be certain clouds that are going to be better suited for certain types of applications or environments. Some may be better at AI and ML. Some may be better for serving up applications or doing agile development or secure DevOps. And so, it's not a one-size-fits-all, right? You want to be able to have best of breed. You want to be able to go to the best cloud environment that's going to deliver the best AI solution that's going to help you to have the best results. right? You're not going to be forced to go with, well, you don't have the best AI solution, but you're our cloud, so we're going to use you. And so it really comes down to choice and access and the ability to have best of breed. And the one thing I'll point to is if you look at how we run our personal lives or how our personal lives, if you look at everyone's home, you have multiple streaming services, whether it's Netflix, Amazon Prime, you have Apple for Apple Music or Apple for music for movies, or Verizon or whoever your service provider is. You have Nest for your thermostats, you have Ring for your security, right? You weren't forced to go to one cloud provider and say, give me security, give me your thermostat, and then I'm going to get your streaming services and whatever movies you tend to have. No, you get the best abilities, and we're out there making them work together so you get a holistic view of your house or management of your house. It's important, not just from best of breed and what those solutions provide, but it's also important because if you need to attract and retain talent, and so the environment that they work in must resemble the environment at their home, right? You don't want to go to work and then you take a 10-year step back in technology and the things you're working on and what you have the ability to do. And so therefore, they need to really push the envelope on making sure they have access to innovation for their folks.
Sean, thank you for that very relatable example. I know I can relate to that for sure during this time when we're all working remotely. Looking forward, and at Defense One, that's what we're all about. We have a forward-leaning emphasis in our coverage and in the events and content that we bring to this audience. So looking forward from your point of view, where do you recommend that defense agencies prioritize their initiatives? Particularly when they're looking to support the warfighter in the cloud?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, a well-architected approach is critical to success, right? And that should be a top priority. And the other, recommendation would be, and we see some government agencies doing this, is, the Department of Defense is 3 years behind probably civilian agencies in going on cloud, and probably 10 plus years behind commercial companies, right? And so you have all of these folks that have already had all the trials and tribulations and struggles, and they've built, proven approaches, proven architectures, right? And so my recommendation to the Department of Defense would be to go out to those types of companies, and Cisco is certainly one, and we've had a lot of discussions, and understand, what they've done, their approaches and their architectures, and leverage the lessons learned by corporate America. And so, that will help to cut down on the time it takes to realize the benefits of cloud. It'll also cut down on some of the security concerns or architectural approaches, because you don't have to do it for the first time. You can have the lessons learned. And there's 3 areas that we mentioned today that I think should be at the focus. One is you need a cloud-ready network, right? And it's working with your architecture teams to architect cloud-ready network. 2, pervasive zero trust approach, right? Because with the cloud, it's more about the end user and device and how it interacts with the services, regardless of whether they reside on premise or in the cloud. And the third is visibility, right? If you're going to have a multi-cloud environment and on-prem, you're going to need to be able to have visibility across your environment to ensure that you're delivering the end user experience necessary to ensure mission success.
That's great. Excellent. Thank you so much, Sean. I feel like we have to wrap it up here. We've reached the end of our program, and you really summarized it nicely for our audience right there. Thanks so much for joining me. And I hope we'll have another talk in the future. I want to thank all our speakers today for joining us, and thank you, our audience, for tuning in.
Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you so much, Sean. This event today would not be possible without the support of our underwriter, Cisco. For more information on Cisco and the work they are doing, be sure to check out their resources in the chat. This full webcast has been recorded and will be sent to you by the end of the week. Keep a watch out for it in your email, and be sure to share the conversation with your colleagues. Thank you all again, and we hope you all to stay safe and healthy and have a great day.